Episode 4, Pursuit.
The episode starts off back in the Shinigami realm, where several Shinigami are discussing Ryuk's recent disappearance. It's interesting because their honest reaction to it is that they feel sorry for him. They feel like he's going to be stuck there for however many years it takes for whoever picked up his death note to die. Something else worth noting is the fact that one of the Shinigami says that he'll be stuck there until the human dies or until the notebook is destroyed. That's not something that's been discussed as of yet. Yes, Light mentioned possibly destroying it, but Ryuk never told him that destroying the notebook would mean game over. Granted, I guess Light never asked either. It's kind of an important question though, right? What happens when a notebook is destroyed or burned? We know it's not like Zatch Bell, Ryuk isn't just going to get sent back to the Shinigami realm, but if the death note is gone, would Ryuk wipe Light's memory in the same way he would if Light forfeited ownership of it? Also, can a death note actually be destroyed? A quick Google search told me that it'll never run out of pages, which makes sense. A hardworking Shinigami or an arrogant kid with a god complex could potentially fill up a notebook in no time. So, if the pages regenerate, could it not be said that the whole notebook would too? Someone mentions again that Ryuk has 2 notebooks, which is followed up by another Shinigami saying that he'll never understand Ryuk, which implies that Ryuk is different from other Shinigami. He's kind of an outcast, which I don't know what that says about Ryuk, honestly. Shinigami look down on humans, which I can understand given the fact that they're essentially, in so many words, a food source. They kill us to extend their own lives the same way we eat so that we don't die. So is Ryuk going down to the human world the equivalent of him going down to a farm and hanging out with a bunch of cows or pigs? Like, is Ryuk a loser? One more thing before we leave these guys. The designs for these characters are pretty cool, but I can't help but wonder how they came to be. Why does this one have a spade on the side of his skull? Who put that there? Where did these massive bones come from? Why does this one have a bird skull? Where did this guy pick up a fucking bedazzler? There's just so much going on here, but with no real answers, but whatever, I digress. Back in the human world, we finally get the answer to the highly anticipated question, will Light take the Shinigami eyes? The answer is obviously no. I say obviously because from a writing perspective, the Shinigami eyes is too much of a fucking cheat code, and with that in his arsenal, he'd be entirely too strong. And we're here to see this dude struggle, not breeze through this shit. But the story avoids making it a plot contrivance by providing us with a valid reason as to why he would say no.
My plan is to create an ideal new world free from evil and all criminals, and I intend to reign as a god in that world for a very long time.
And it makes perfect sense for his character to want to have a long reign, the same way I'm not mad at the fact that Ryuk was bothered by being followed by the FBI agent despite the agent not being able to actually see him. And that's because Ryuk seems like the type that would let something stupid like that bother him. Plus, before telling Light, he made it 100% clear that he wasn't doing it for him. Ryuk was doing it because it was personally beginning to bug him.
I might consider the deal if it lengthened my life, but not if I die sooner.
Light saying that he might consider the deal if it lengthened his life is a little weird, because if it did lengthen his life, there would be literally no downside to it whatsoever. The two get into a bit of a tiff regarding the fact that Ryuk took so long to inform Light about this.
I don't need you complaining, I didn't tell you this earlier on.
This is what you call telling me early on? I don't see why you couldn't have told me this when we met. Or better yet, you could have simply included it in the instructions for the Death Note.
While I definitely understand where Light is coming from, I still can't get over the fact that this kid is just so ballsy when it comes to talking to Ryuk. Like, damn, he's legit chastising him like he's a partner on a school project or something and not literally a Shinigami. Like, what?
He's not the slightest bit daunted by the fact that I'm a Shinigami. He doesn't suck up to me, and he seems to have no problem giving me a hard time.
If this was any other Shinigami, meaning one who didn't still have a death note, then I could maybe understand, but like, this man has a notebook just like you, and while yours won't kill him, his will definitely kill you. He's lucky Ryuk is such a nice guy, I guess.
You sure there's nothing else you want to tell me ahead of time?
No, nothing else. Probably.
What a fundamentally convenient line of dialogue, and I don't say that to sound negative, because I find it fascinating that by having Ryuk add the word probably, it opens the door for the writer to, at any time, throw in another curveball that could be potentially game-changing for the entire series. By having Ryuk be an unreliable ally that we have to rely on for information concerning the Death Note, it creates an additional layer of unpredictability that can be used at any moment without it seeming like the author is just randomly pulling something out of their ass. The fact that Ryuk is unreliable, coupled with the fact that in his world he's kind of a loser, if additional rules or information are brought up down the line, it's not going to be as annoying since we already know that he's not an all-knowing encyclopedia for all things Death Note. With Light done chastising his roommate, the conversation switches gears into lighthearted territory as Light makes a joke about how he might have considered the deal were it to give him wings instead of eyes.
Just the idea of flying around freely in the sky sounds very godlike.
Ryuk then comments on how if he had wings, he'd really stick out.
Not to mention the police would have no trouble finding you.
Showing that, like Drax, he can be a bit dense at times.
Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it.
Light comments on how if he continued making trades for eyes and wings, he'd eventually really be a Shinigami, but Ryuk comments on how, given how much work he's putting in, he'd make a fine substitute Shinigami. However, Light's not really a fan of that. He doesn't want to be compared to a Shinigami. He feels that there's a clear distinction between him using the notebook to create a better world and Shinigami using it to extend their own lives. Ryuk also mentions the state of the Shinigami realm again, and it's just like super fucking depressing.
We lead meaningless and empty lives, and the only reason we still take human lives is because we're afraid to die ourselves. The truth of the matter is that we no longer even know why we exist. I doubt there's any reason for our existence at all.
But as depressing as it is, it's also really fascinating. It actually reminds me of these lines from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
You see, I'm sure we can change. Because we're weak. And because we die. We have to fight in order to live. And that's what will make us strong.
Now, obviously the context is different, but the point I'm trying to make is that because our lives are so short, we're forced to try and find meaning and be productive and make the most of our time here. Shinigami don't have to worry about that, and as such they become stagnant and just, well, they kind of stop giving a fuck. And as such, their world, and hell, it looks like even their bodies are just starting to rot away into nothingness. The fact that they cannot die makes their lives seem so pointless and just not worth living to an extent. And yeah. Also, I just want to say that Interlude to a Party is the best filler recap episode I've ever seen from any anime. That whole last sequence is just, it's great. But I digress. Light goes on to offer Ryuk some words of wisdom.
You told me just now that the Shinigami realm is slowly rotting, right? Well, when you return from this world, why not use what you've learned here to try and change it for the better?
Light then tells Ryuk that he has a plan for finding out the identity of the person who's following him, but first he has to test out the limits of the Death Note. The following morning, 6 more people died in prison. However, the circumstances surrounding their deaths were unusual. One of them wrote a suicide note, one drew a pentagram on his wall using his own blood just before dying, and the last one escaped his cell and ran into the restroom before he finally collapsed. After receiving the information, L deduces that this might have been a test and tells the NPA not to release any additional information to the media regarding these deaths. As far as they need to know, these were just another string of heart attacks. He adds that he feels like Kira might have been conducting a test and that by releasing the information it would only serve to let him know whether or not it was successful.
He's playing with people's lives as if all this was just a game. It's unforgivable.
Following the chief after we've discovered that he's Light's dad is interesting. He's trying so hard to catch Kira, all the while not knowing that it's his son. It's fucked up because the chief is such an earnest and good man and he's just raised a fucking lemon. The next day, Light hacks into his dad's computer and discovers the results of his test. He wrote 6 names and gave them each unique instructions leading up to their death. 3 of them, the 3 I mentioned earlier, went just as expected. However, the other 3 simply died of heart attacks because what he had asked them to do was practically impossible. For example, he wrote that one would die of a heart attack in front of the Eiffel Tower in 1 hour, which would have been physically impossible given the prisoner was in Japan. The other was supposed to draw a picture of L, but that too would have been impossible because he doesn't know what L looks like. The last was supposed to write a note claiming that he knew L was suspicious of the Japanese police, but that also didn't work.
To be honest, I actually expected this one to work, but it didn't end up happening. It's impossible to make someone write what they don't already know. Or, at the very least, it has to be the kind of thing that they could come up with on their own.
I agree that it is odd that one was able to write a suicide note with a coded message in it, but the other wasn't able to write a different, less complex note. That's really weird, honestly. Speaking of the coded message, we switch back to L, who's going over the evidence, and he notices that the suicide letter was spelled in such a way that it read, "L, do you know?" The scene switches back to Light, and it appears as though he's ready to enact his new plan. He finds a criminal that was recently broadcasted on the news and claims he's going to use him, just before going to his phone to look up a phone number. Y'all remember when I said this? That when he walks past these girls, they notice him and start to giggle to themselves. This is a subtle way of showing us the effect Light has on girls. They want to fuck him, and he banks on that heavily throughout the series. Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm sure I can find someone. I got a few people in mind. Believe it or not, I'm actually a rather popular guy.
Hello? Light? Morning.
Alright folks, welcome back to How to Use It. This episode's rules are ones we already know, actually. The first says, the human who uses this note can either go to heaven or hell. Though, again, in the later episodes it says that no one goes to heaven or hell, so I don't really know what to make of this one. I'm guessing Death Note users go somewhere else entirely? Maybe they become Shinigami too? Or if you go by a certain fanfiction, maybe it's something else entirely. The second one says, if the time of death is written within 40 seconds after writing the cause of death as a heart attack, the time of death can be manipulated, and the time can go into effect within 40 seconds after writing the name. You know what? Upon second glance, I guess this really is an entirely different rule than being able to write the cause of death. I figured they were one and the same, but I could see how just being able to write the cause of death doesn't inherently mean you can determine the time of death. But I guess it just always kind of seemed it was implied that he could do both. Maybe that was just me assuming as such before it was actually revealed that he could. So the scene starts off with Light heading towards his Saturday morning date with his FBI agent still following him around. Something worth noting is the fact that this girl is looking right at him as he's talking to Ryuk. His whole thing was that he couldn't talk to him in public, but here he is doing just that. Like, imagine staring at this guy and you just see him clearly talking but there's no one around. I mean, it's not even a nitpick. He told Ryuk he couldn't talk to him in public, but he's having a whole conversation with Ryuk right now. He even turned his head upward to look at him at one point.
I'm so excited. And the best part is I have you all to myself.
Yeah.
Thirsty, bro. The FBI agent decides to follow him on the bus, but not before saying,
Light Yagami. No cause for suspicion. I'll be done with my surveillance today, and that'll be it.
geez, if Light did nothing, he'd be fine, essentially. The investigation would be over, but, well, that clearly wouldn't be any fun, so... The FBI agent sits behind Light and his date as they all head to Spaceland. We get a little montage of everyone enjoying their day, and then all of a sudden, this motherfucker shows up. And it's kind of weird, right? I mean, Light has put himself on a bus with a known criminal. I mean, this is a legitimately terrifying situation. It's one thing to kill criminals in the safety of your own room, but it's something else to be out on the front line, in the trenches, so to speak.
7 passengers, excluding him, no one's in the way, everything should go smoothly.
But like, what if it didn't? I mean, how far-reaching is the influence of the Death Note? What if there was someone in the way? What if there was some other altercation happening on the bus? I mean, in America, it seems like wild shit happens on the bus all the time. I don't know. I'm gonna come back to this at the end of the video. So the criminal gets on the bus and tries to hold everyone hostage in the hopes that Spaceland would pay the ransom.
Have a female staff member bring all of Spaceland's cash from yesterday. If you mess with me at all, or try to get the police involved, I swear I'll kill every one of these passengers.
Which is like, what? This is just a fucking public bus. Yeah, it's headed to Spaceland, but why the fuck would they pay the ransom? You think if I take the bus to Disneyland, they're gonna pay to save me if someone hijacks it? Get the fuck out of here. I guess he's supposed to be a drug addict, so maybe in his mind this makes total sense. Or maybe he's just being influenced by the Death Note. I guess it's probably a combination of both. Anyway, Light shows a note to his date and says once the guy turns around, he'll go and try to grab the gun. My question is, when did you have the opportunity to write such a long ass note without the guy even noticing? I mean, look at how much he wrote. He's just so composed that he's also included her name. Like, my guy, you're in a hostage situation and you just have the time to write a formal letter addressing her and everything. Does it end with sincerely Light Yagami? And he had to have written it in real time, because if he just pulled the pre-written note out of his pocket, then the FBI agent who was sitting behind him would have clearly seen that. So, okay. Speaking of the FBI agent, he sees the note and tells him that it would be stupid to try. Light then fires back and claims that he might only be saying that because he's in on the hijacking.
Do you have any proof that you're not his accomplice? Why should we trust you?
The agent, kind of, in a shitty situation, decides to prove his identity by showing his FBI badge, and it was in that moment that he knew, or fuck, no, I guess he didn't know in that specific moment, but nevertheless, he fucked up.
Oh, now you fucked up!
Also, Light's actually pretty surprised to see that it's an FBI agent, but it makes sense that Elle would resort to using people who didn't have any connection to the NPA. Anyway, the two decide to work together to figure out what to do about the hijacker, but as they come up with a plan, Light accidentally drops a note and the hijacker notices it.
Don't move, you little punk! What the hell is that? You guys were planning something back here, weren't you?
Oh no, oh my gosh, they're in trouble. Oh, what's he gonna do when he finds that note?
Plans for a date, huh? Stupid kid.
Oh gosh, okay, so it was just a regular note. Okay, oh alright, we're good. They're safe. Oh, but that's so weird. Why would he even need to write that down on a small piece of paper? Unless
Who the hell are you? You in the very back. What do you think you're doing? How long have you been hiding back there?
So it turns out that piece of paper with his itinerary on it was actually from the Death Note, and since the hijacker touched it, he can now see Ryuk, which, let's just say he's not a big fan. This was such a fucking power move by Light, like damn. And the fact that Ryuk was completely oblivious to the fact that Light had cast him in a role in the production, hearing him realize it in real time was great.
What's this? You're talking to me? So you mean you can actually see me right now?
But yeah, then the guy just pulls a Danny DeVito.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Hey!
Luckily, or I guess by design, he only shoots upward, meaning no one gets hit or dies. Ryuk goes on to express just how impressed he is by the fact that Light was able to use all the information he had given him in such a masterful way. Like, if you need proof that Light's a fucking genius, you need only watch this scene. After unloading his clip, the hijacker makes a break for it, begging the driver to let him off the bus. And just as he jumps off, he's instantly run over, thus completing the instructions written in the notebook. Light then goes over exactly what he wrote in the notebook, explaining to us how it all played out the way he had written it. I also like the fact that he wrote that the person would see a phantom, and how according to his test, it wouldn't have happened unless Ryuk was there. What I mean is that the Death Note can't make someone hallucinate. The guy not only had to touch a piece of the notebook, but Ryuk also had to be there in order for it to all work out the way he needed it to. Also, to go back to what I was saying earlier about everything going smoothly when he got on the bus, how about when he was killed after he got off the bus? Accidental deaths are super weird when you think about it. This even applies to that dude from the first episode that got hit by the truck. How does it work out that someone will be there to run that person over? Does the Death Note also influence them too? Does it make a person speed up to make sure the hit is fatal? How does the Death Note choose who'll be the one to run that person over? Especially in this situation when it was written hours ago. Light also included what time he'd get on the bus and what time he'd die. What if the bus driver was running late? What if his bus broke down? Is this like Final Destination where everyone involved has kind of blanket protection against anything stopping them from being where they need to be and dying when they're supposed to die? I don't know. The episode ends with Light's voiceover claiming that the FBI agent Ray Penber will be next.
You will be next, Ray Penber.
And roll credits. That's all, guys. Remember to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Until next time, later.